In some ways, Rahul Pandey's career as a YouTuber has been pretty typical. After several years working at large tech companies like Pinterest and Facebook, he started uploading videos that gave career advice to other engineers who are trying to break into the industry. Then once he built a significant following, he left his full-time job in 2022 to focus on this type of educational content full-time. But where he differs from other YouTubers is his choice of business model. Rather than going the typical route of securing brand sponsorships, he instead co-founded Taro, an online community platform where engineers can collaborate and share career advice. The company monetizes through a monthly subscription, and to date it's mentored thousands of engineers through its community. In our interview, we discussed how Rahul built his channel, why he launched a tech platform, and what his future on YouTube now looks like. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, let's jump into my interview with Rahul. Hey Rahul, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Simon. I'm excited to be here.
So we're here to talk about, this YouTube channel that you launched, and then also this education startup that you also launched. But first, let's talk a little bit about your background. You have like a very deep background in engineering. In fact, you've worked for multiple high-profile companies, right?
That's right. My entire career has been here in Silicon Valley as a software engineer at a bunch of, VC-funded, VC-backed companies.
Yeah, so you went to Stanford, and then you worked for like a startup that got acquired by Pinterest?
Yep, that's right. So 5 years at Stanford, bachelor's and master's in computer science. And what happened, which was pretty interesting, is during my 5th year, we call it the co-term program at Stanford. And so I was doing research in a lab, and a lot of the lab work that we had, it had inherent economic value for recommendations and big data companies. And so the professor who I worked with turned that into a startup. That startup actually ended up getting acquired. In fact, it was an acqui-hire, meaning that it was primarily a talent acquisition, but it got acquired by Pinterest. So I made my way over there for a couple of years before I navigated then to Facebook, now Meta, in 2017.
Yeah, and Pinterest is very focused on content recommendation. In fact, that's kind of its secret sauce, right?
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, the value of Pinterest, and I would say actually at this point, pretty much any kind of social app is powered by how relevant and how timely is the content that you're showing your users in the feed, right? The feed dominates so much of, these content plays. So I feel like if you don't have good recommendations, you're dead in the water for Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, etc.
Yeah. And so you then went to work for Facebook, which eventually, changed its name to Meta. What did you work on there?
So I joined as a senior Android engineer, and it was really exciting. I joined a very secretive division of Facebook called Building 8. And Building 8 was unique because it was building hardware, which, for a company like Facebook, their bread and butter has very much been, an Android app or iOS app that lives on, people's phone, but they've never actually built hardware. They actually famously had the Facebook phone, which, it kind of didn't pan out at all. But this was basically 2017, the new attempt of building hardware. And what we built turned into what is called Portal, which is actually a consumer hardware device for video calling. I think that it was a really tough time to join. I mean, the time I joined was actually really exciting and a lot of optimism. But shortly after, as you are aware, as everyone is probably aware, Cambridge Analytica happened, and there's a lot of concern about the trustworthiness of Facebook and what they're doing with the data. And so given that environment, I believe that was a really big factor in why Portal as a consumer video calling device didn't sell that well, right? Like people talked about how they don't want Zuckerberg in their kitchen or in their living room or in their bedroom while making a video call. And so that led to some pretty negative headwinds for the product. So working for these companies for a long time, both Pinterest and Facebook, did you start, so obviously there's all this talk about the actual coding skills needed to work for these companies, but it seems like you got an appreciation of also the soft skills that you need in order to succeed as an engineer. And that's and this is kind of dovetails to what we'll talk about later, but these are the things that maybe you don't learn getting a degree in computer science, right? Absolutely. I mean, that hit the nail on the head in the sense that, going to Stanford, I spent a ton of time doing coursework and programming classes that prepared you, presumably, to be an effective engineer in industry. But what I found is that you graduate with your diploma, you get the job, and it turns out that the coding part of the job, if you're an engineer, is half the battle. There's a whole other world of skills and communication and how do you pick a project, how do you pick a manager, that actually ends up being equally as important and perhaps more important the more senior you become in determining how much success you find as an engineer. And I feel like, that was shocking to me because I went to Stanford, right? Like I feel like I had this privilege of being in Silicon Valley. I had a ton of help and mentorship and support. And so I thought about that from the framing of, what if I didn't go to school in the middle of the Bay Area? What if I went in the middle of the country or maybe international? There's so much lack of support. There's so little support for these people who I think, frankly, are just unaware of the true skills needed to succeed as an engineer beyond just kind of the, writing a for loop.
Can you talk a little bit about like what those skills are?
Yeah. I mean, so I think the big misconception that people have is, your job as an engineer is to write code. That's not actually true. Your job as an engineer, like every other employee of the company, is to have impact for the company. How do you move the needle for the company, whatever is the KPI that is being measured, whether that's engagement or revenue or user acquisition. And so your job is, how can I work with the right people? How can I pick the right projects? How can I pick the correct manager who can help me have that business impact? And then that is the way you actually, get promoted or find fulfilling work. And so if you're stuck in this bubble of, I'm just coding my way through, yeah, you might find some degree of success, but I think there's a ceiling to what you can actually accomplish. And so, what we focus on, and we'll talk about this later, is, the things like, how do you collaborate effectively with a team? How do you do code review effectively, right? So it's not just like business skills, I would say, but it's like the application of soft skills and business skills in the engineering context. And I think there's a dearth of content available for engineers in that vein, and that's the kind of the gap that we're filling.
And then you eventually figured out you kind of had a knack for teaching these like soft skill sets. You like taught a course, or you got affiliated with some organization that offers courses. What was that? That's
right. So, I mean, I think the origin of just teaching and being involved and kind of trying to give back has been there from the very early days. So at Stanford, actually, I was involved with teaching some of the undergrad courses for computer science. And then later on, what you're referring to is CodePath. So CodePath is a nonprofit organization which teaches mobile development to universities. And so I got involved back, I think it was 2016, I started teaching for them. And I just found that it was super enjoyable. And one thing that they did is they were very early on in this trend of remote learning. And so the way they would tell instructors like me to help students was record a YouTube video, which is effectively a walkthrough of building an app or talking about some concept in Android. I'm an Android developer, so I was primarily on the Android side of it. And I mean, I look back at some of the videos I made in 2016 and I cringe at like how bad they were. Like the audio was so bad, the editing was awful. But what was so interesting to me is that because of the CodePath platform, they distributed that video to literally thousands of people around the country who were trying to learn Android, and people got a ton of value from it. And I was kind of shocked. I was like, this thing that I put together in a weekend had so much positive impact for people, and it was a kind of leveraged impact in the sense that I'm not teaching 10 people in the classroom. I recorded my video into a webcam, and I'm able to reach literally tens of thousands of people. And so I think that was maybe the 2016, 2017 was the period that opened my eyes to, hey, there's a whole world out there of content creation, if you're an effective teacher, that you can have a pretty huge amount of impact.
So these weren't just unlisted YouTube videos that they only distributed to their students. They like put it on their channel so that anybody who came across it could view it.
Yeah, I would say the majority of them were actually unlisted, and they were all the CodePath students were, given the link. But I think there were a handful of videos that were actually public, and it was kind of just, the magic of the YouTube algorithm, I guess, which is that people who, it wasn't necessarily designed for them or it wasn't the intended audience, but they were able to find it and get value from it. And that was pretty magical to me.
Mm-hmm. So when did you then when did that light bulb moment happen for you where you were like, well, if it worked on this channel with these pretty low production values, maybe I could, learn a little bit more about shooting and editing video and maybe post it to my own YouTube channel? How did that transition happen?
It happened after a couple months after I joined Facebook. So I think what happened is, 2016, 2017, I was still at Pinterest. And then I spent a bunch of time interviewing. And so, as you probably know, interviewing and doing all the, coding interview preparation took up a bunch of time. And so I was pretty busy with that. But once I got to Facebook, I felt, okay, I made it in some sense. I made it to the company that I wanted to join. I'm doing really well. I feel pretty content, but I still feel like I could do much more outside of work. And so that was really, I think, the moment that, hey, I had this CodePath experience a year ago. Can I now basically do similar content? So I started off in 2019, doing Android content on my own YouTube channel. And I think the interesting thing about that is, like you said, what I did with CodePath was so lo-fi, so low fidelity. And for someone like me especially, who's always on that kind of iteration grind of like one video a week, posting regularly, there's so much to improve on with video, right? You have a script, you have your camera, you have your audio, you have editing, like all these, there's probably like 5 or 10 different skills that are pretty deep. Like you could spend literally years like refining any one of those skills. And so I feel like I got very quickly addicted to the grind of how do I keep getting better and better and make better and better content, better videos that can help more and more people. And that was really, I think 2019 was when that started.
And did you start out with more hard coding stuff around Android, or did you start talking about the soft skills early on?
Yeah, so I made a deliberate decision to, I started off with more hard skills, and I think that was a combination of, number one, that's what I had done with CodePath. So I knew that, okay, this is something that people can find value from, and I could also teach effectively because I had been doing Android development professionally for about 3 or 4 years at that point. And the other component of that too, which is maybe applicable for many people listening, or for, when I talk to friends about it, is that when you talk about the hard skill of Android development or programming, there's actually not that much in terms of opinion or your own personal experience that you have to embed in there, right? It's mostly by, here's this concept, let me explain it in a detailed way that makes sense to you. When you start talking about the kind of softer skills, I actually had a concern that this might be crossing a line with Facebook, where they might not want an engineer at Facebook to now talk about the Facebook process or the life of a Facebook engineer. And so I was very deliberate.
Because then you're getting into like the politics. You're getting into almost into the politics of work, because you're talking about how to, I know manipulate is considered a bad word, but to work within an organization and within the bureaucracy and stuff like that. And they might not want that bureaucracy exposed, right?
Yeah, 100%. And so like, actually, Facebook had a policy, because like, here's the reality, right? If you're an engineer at Facebook, or anyone at Facebook, like Facebook, Google, Amazon, these are companies that they have a huge amount of brand associated with these companies. And so if you are a content creator and you're hungry for attention and engagement and clicks, and who isn't, right? Then it's so easy to just fall back to the brand that everyone has an opinion about or everyone has an awareness of. And so all these companies have pretty explicit guidelines of, you cannot use the likeness and the affinity of the company to promote yourself. So you can't say, I'm a Facebook tech lead and go check out my stuff. Like, go check out, here's my opinion, almost as a representative of the company. They really don't want that, right? And so I was very deliberate when I started out in 2019 that the content I make should stand on its own 2 legs without the Facebook brand or my brand necessarily carrying it. It should be the quality of the technical explanation. And that was a pretty explicit choice, just because I didn't want to get into trouble with the corporate side of it.
And so when did you start noticing like your videos were actually getting watched? Like, was there like especially on YouTube with the algorithm, a lot of YouTubers I speak to, they talk about some video that really kind of pops and then they start seeing all these downstream effects. But yours is because it was more kind of learning based and the kind of things that people might be typing into Google or the YouTube search bar. Was it more gradual, or how did you start noticing like an incoming audience?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, what you said. So in general, when you think about YouTube, the 2 ways you grow your channel are recommended or search traffic, right? Browse or search traffic. And so when you're making educational content, you can't expect that to go viral. Like, people aren't just going to start recommending it to their friends. It's going to be, like you said, very much search driven. And so it's a much more linear progression rather than an exponential progression, I would say. And I think the benefit I had is I was not trying to make money. I was not trying to hit it big immediately. And you can't expect that with tutorial educational content. So I do think there was just more a question of refining and getting better and better. And I saw more views over time. The one big inflection point, I would say, There was another inflection point post leaving Facebook where I feel like now I was way more aggressive with promoting my videos. I can talk about that. But during the period of my content creation journey, which was more about the programming side of it, have you heard of Free Code Camp? This is a pretty massive YouTube channel. Okay, so Free Code Camp has like at the time it had like 3 million subscribers. So it's like one of the biggest coding YouTube channels. And the way they work is they don't actually have that much original content. What they do is they have basically a team of people who review content from other creators like myself and say, hey, your content is good enough that we will actually publish it on the Free Code Camp channel. And they don't pay you anything. They don't they don't edit it for you. It's like really you do all the work. You give the MP4 file to them, the video file to them, and they publish it. But the benefit of that is that they have massive, massive distribution, right? So at that point, I remember I learned about Free Code Camp. I emailed them and they said, hey, I think your content is good enough. And so I spent about a month just making the highest quality tutorial I could ever create. And it got accepted and it published on Free Code Camp. And I remember the day that it got published, I saw like a 20% jump in all my metrics, like subscriber count, view count, just because Free Code Camp had that power to distribute you and get you on a bigger screen. And so that would be the main inflection point from that period.
So you have like 70,000 YouTube subscribers now. What was that growth curve? So you start in 2019. When did you walk me kind of through where you saw that growth, like the timeline?
Yeah, so I remember I kind of think about it from the perspective of end of year where I was. So I think my first video got published in October 2019. And I remember coming into 2020, like January 2020, I had like 500 subscribers. And I was actually kind of happy. I was like, wow. I was able to get 500 subscribers in like 2 months. And I was pretty excited about that people actually cared enough to subscribe to me. Because that even that was like a kind of a question mark to me. And so then I think all of 2020 was just that slow grind of how can I make more and more
and you're publishing like one
content.
video a week?
Yeah. So I mean, I think the way that period is hard to the content I was making back then is quite different from the talking head videos I'm making now. Like right now I'm doing one video every Thursday without fail. Back then, the way it worked was like I'd have like an idea for, I'm going to build this app. And that app would actually have like a 10-part breakdown. And so what I would do then is I would publish like 2 parts out of 10 every week for 5 weeks, right? And then I would maybe take a break for 2 weeks, and then I'd publish 2 or 3 videos a week for the next video series I was making. So it was, I would say, a bit more like bursty compared to what it is now. But on average, I would say at least 1 or 2 videos per week.
Yeah, so you had 500 at the beginning of 2020, but then...
Yeah, and then 500 at the beginning of 2020. And then I remember the Free Code Camp collaboration happened in late 2020. And that was where I feel like I finally made it onto the map in some degree in that very small niche of Android development YouTubers, which is a very small bubble. But I believe at the end of 2020, I was around 8,000 or 9,000 YouTube subscribers. And then 2021 is where I started to really focus on production value and just doing a lot more in terms of like outreach. And I started becoming active on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn was actually a very good growth mechanism. I can talk more about that later. But I think at the end of 2021, I was around 25,000 subscribers at the end of 2021. And now as we approach the end of 2022, like you said, I'm around 71,000 right now.
What was your LinkedIn strategy? Were you just kind of like breaking down some of the points you were making in the video and just bulleting them out and stuff like that?
Exactly. So I think LinkedIn, it may be different now, but at least back then, there was such a scarcity of high quality, high credibility content on LinkedIn. I think I don't know, for whatever reason, Twitter was the place where the Android community and the engineering community in general lived in terms of having intellectual discussion. And LinkedIn had this kind of, even today, I would say, it had this like negative connotation around it. Like, oh, you're a LinkedIn influencer. You're like a LinkedIn content creator. But that led to the ability for me to grow rapidly on LinkedIn, especially in 2020, 2021, because it was like basically the classic model of content repurposing. I would take a video, and I knew I had done a lot of deep thinking in that video. I had good points. I thought this could help people. I would articulate that in bullet points or in article format on LinkedIn. And then LinkedIn engagement and LinkedIn algorithm would do its magic. And I would just keep acquiring new audience members or connections on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you eventually got it over to what, 50,000 followers?
Yeah, I think today I'm at around 50,000 followers on LinkedIn.
So you get to the end of 2021, you have over 20,000 subscribers to the YouTube channel. That's around the time that you leave Facebook, right? So what was the thinking behind it? Did you just know you wanted to be a full-time creator, or did you already have an idea for launching like a more scalable startup at that point?
Yeah, at that point, the idea was very much, let's do a scalable startup. So like the environment that I'm coming from, right, to keep that in mind, is that I went to Stanford. All my friends were either in a big tech company or they were doing their own startup. And so it just felt like the very natural thing. Even like I'm talking 10 years ago, the idea was I want to go create something. I want to build something that can grow quickly and have a lot of impact on a lot of people. And so I would say starting in maybe early 2021, I had been thinking about and vetting ideas with co-founders and trying to talk to different people. And so the idea when I made the decision to leave in late 2021 was very much, okay, I have this audience now on LinkedIn or YouTube. I have some degree of credibility. How can I leverage that now to take what I'm doing and 10x it in terms of content, quality, and potentially revenue? At that point, I was making some money on YouTube, but it wasn't that meaningful. And I was like, how can I really double down into this whole arena and make it a scalable venture?
And you eventually find a co-founder, right?
Yep. So I'm working on Taro, the company, with my co-founder, Alex, who I've known for a long time now. We actually were on the same team initially at Facebook. So I've known him since 2017.
Yeah. So you come up with the idea of Join Taro, which is basically like a very premium version of what you're doing on YouTube. It's like an educational type platform. And did you start building it right away, or I know you went to Y Combinator? What came first? Did you build an MVP first and then apply to Y Combinator, or how did that work?
Yeah. So the Y Combinator story is interesting. We actually applied to Y Combinator, in fact, while we were still employed at Facebook. Well, at that point, actually, Alex had gone off to join Robinhood, and I was still at Facebook. But we were talking pretty much every day. We were talking about what could we build, what kind of content could we create, and so we applied to YC in late 2021, got rejected. The idea just wasn't there. We had no traction, and also it's a negative signal, right? Like you're applying to this incubator, saying that I want to build a world-changing company, but hey, I don't have enough conviction in my idea to quit my job yet. And so I think that itself is kind of a non-starter. Like YC and other people, other venture capitalists, they want to fund entrepreneurs who have enough conviction and enough credibility that they can leave their job and pursue it full time. And so we actually applied to YC with a different idea back then. We kind of pivoted 2 or 3 times between November 2021 and May of 2022. We applied again in May, and then we got into Y Combinator and did the summer batch of YC in 2022.
So, and we haven't really described the product yet, but I guess we're getting there. So what happened at Y Combinator? Like, what did you build and what kind of progress did you make there?
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, YC doesn't actually help you in terms of product development. What they do is they just give you advice on, hey, you're stuck with this problem. You're stuck with this user acquisition issue. Here are some ideas of other founders that you can apply. So the idea that we had was based on the traction of the YouTube channel and the content we were creating. And the other thing I'll mention that we haven't talked about is Alex and I, every month or so, we would have these live events designed for how can we help software engineers get better. And they were about every single, like various topics like code review, finding a good project, finding a good manager, finding a good company, like all these different topics that engineers care about. We cover them in these monthly live sessions. And what we found is that literally 700, 800, 900 people would show up live to these events. And so basically we had a bunch of data. We have the YouTube channel engagement, we have these live events, we have LinkedIn, and all of that led to this belief that people are hungry for, when I say people, I'm talking about software engineers. Software engineers are hungry for this kind of content that gives them personalized, contextual advice about how to advance their career. And that was the premise for the idea, for the company. So we don't exactly know the format, whether it's video content or a Q&A platform, or it's just more live sessions. But we think that there is an appetite to pay for engineers to unlock this really high quality content that will get them promoted faster. And that was the idea that we applied to YC with. And we had actually a mobile app at that point already, which is basically a collection of content we had already created. And that had gotten some traction. And that was, I think, what led to the acceptance into the YC program.
So like a lot of creators who are listening to this and they were hearing about what you're going to build, they would say, okay, well, I'm going to launch a Patreon, or I'm going to launch online courses on like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or one of the other teaching platforms. But you are an engineer. You decided to launch your own app. What's the kind of thinking there of why not build on an already existing platform but launch your own platform?
Yeah, I mean, so to be clear, we did that, right? So I've been doing YouTube literally for more than 3 years now, and then I had a LinkedIn Learning course as well. So I think this was, I forget the date now, but yeah, it was like, I think middle of 2020, I published a LinkedIn Learning course. And so I had done CodePath too. So you can effectively think of CodePath as another form of like LinkedIn Learning. And so we had been doing that. And I think the issue we kept running into is that if you truly want to have a meaningful amount of impact on people, and the way you have a big business is have a lot of impact on a lot of people, right? The way you have a lot of impact is by having a deeper relationship with the consumer. And the issue we ran into again and again and again is that with YouTube and LinkedIn and with CodePath, it's a beautiful platform because they give you the audience, right? If you have good content, they will surface your content to a bunch of people, but the depth of your relationship with the audience is very limited. I don't get email addresses. I don't get, feedback. I don't get, all this additional data about my audience on YouTube in the way that I am getting now with my own mobile app. And so I think that was kind of the core idea, is how can we really deepen our relationship and own the user in a way that we would never get to really have that relationship on another platform.
So the way that I've heard Y Combinator described is that it's like a sprint. Like you're expected to increase your user acquisition by X amount, and you're constantly refining the product. And all these, these previous founders and VCs are giving you advice constantly, trying to help you create product market fit. You said you already had an app going into it. Going into Y Combinator and coming out of Y Combinator, how was your company different?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, by far the biggest thing that happened through Y Combinator was we started to actually make money. I feel like, especially as an engineer, and it's probably true for everyone, it is very, very scary to ask for money. And so we came into Y Combinator with a mobile app, an Android and iOS app, which had around 10,000 users total. But we had never asked anyone for money. And so one of the things that Y Combinator does a really good job of is they will repeatedly tell you that launch early and launch often. And by launch, what they mean is figure out what is the core danger, like the core risk of your business, and de-risk it. So if you might have a lot of content that you can create and people like the content, but if no one's willing to pay for it, you will never, ever create a business out of it, right? And so within 3 weeks of us joining Y Combinator, we finally turned on what we call Taro Premium, which is a paid offering for our members. And luckily, people did sign up, and they were willing to put money down, and that gave us more confidence that we could continue to pursue the idea. But by the end of Y Combinator, we were almost at $100,000 in recurring revenue, in annual recurring revenue, and that's just something that we had literally $0 before coming in.
Yeah. So now's the time where we're going to dive into the app itself. So tell me, now that you're done with Y Combinator, I go and download the Taro app. That's what it's called, right? Taro.
Yep.
What am I getting as a free subscriber, and what ways are you converting free people into paid, and what are they getting if they chalk up the money?
Yep. Okay. So the idea with the Taro app, and it's on mobile, Android, iOS, and we also have a pretty robust web application for Taro as well. It's a classic freemium approach. The idea is you download the app, and there's a ton of valuable content available completely for free. In fact, most of the content is available for free. But we have one part of the app, which is effectively you can kind of think of it like a Quora competitor, which is verticalized. It's only focused on software engineer problems and solutions. And the really nice thing about what we're doing with the Q&A platform on Taro is that every piece of content is tagged by level and company. And this goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, is that what engineers really want is really contextual, specific advice for their situation. And when you go into the Q&A of Taro, you can say, I want to look at other, mid-level engineers at a large company in a way that you would never be able to find that kind of data on Quora or Reddit or Blind or a Google search. And so a lot of the Q&A content is paywalled. And that is a big conversion lever to get people to pay. The other thing that is paywalled is we have these Taro premium sessions, which are, very senior people in industry come in and talk about how did they get to the level they got to, how did they get promoted, what projects did they find, and what advice could they share for other people. Most of those sessions are also limited to the Taro premium community. And so we have a couple of different perks like that. And also, there's a premium Slack community as well. There is some community aspect as well of like, you're going to be part of this exclusive group of people who really care about their career. And that is also a pretty good reason to upgrade.
So how much content are you as the company actually creating versus what the community is creating?
Yeah, this is something that we're actively working on and changing. So for the video content, Alex and I are still creating a lot of it. I would say most of it.
It's like tutorials. It's
basically explainers of here is how compensation works in big tech. Here's how you can optimize your compensation. Here's the things that we talked about earlier. Like here's how we think code review should be done. So basically like anecdotal advice or experiences. We also have some external people come in and give their story. Like those are the Taro premium sessions. But I would say the majority of that content is still made by our core team in-house. Where we're really investing more in, because it's way more scalable, is the Q&A platform. Because that is where we actually have UGC, user-generated content, people who are coming in and answering questions, asking questions. And that is something where, the kind of beautiful thing about our model is that we have friction to get in. Friction meaning you have to pay in order to ask or answer a question. And because that friction exists, inherently the quality of the interaction on Taro is significantly higher than Blind or Quora or these other platforms where engineers will often gather. And that is where, we are seeing a lot more kind of organic conversation without our involvement.
And how much are you charging for a premium subscription?
So today we're charging $60 a month or $350 a year.
So let's zoom back out to all the free content you're creating, like the YouTube channel, the LinkedIn. You also have a Substack newsletter. How is that all integrating with what you're doing with the app?
Yeah. So the idea is that we want to take all of the credibility and trust and distribution that we get on other platforms and funnel that into Taro. So you can kind of think of it as like everything pointing into this core product that we have, which is Taro. I would say about 80% of the people who have upgraded to Taro Premium have initially discovered us through YouTube or LinkedIn. I'd say primarily YouTube, maybe to some degree LinkedIn as well. But this model of doing business is going to become more and more common in the coming years, where you effectively have a lot of free content, a lot of free value you're giving away on YouTube. And the benefit of that is YouTube will work its magic and put you in front of people who never would have found you out otherwise. You can kind of think of it as SEO, right? And then all those people, all those subscribers will build up trust with me or the company. And then over time, they will then convert to a premium member of Taro.
Well, how do you funnel people from YouTube to Taro? Like, what are you making standalone videos, or is it just like having a little thing at the very end that plugs Taro? What's your strategy there?
Yeah, so the way we think about it is we want Taro to feel like an extension of the quality of content we have on YouTube. So literally, I would say 90% of the videos I make on YouTube, every video I make nowadays, these talking head videos I make, are somewhere between 8 and 10 minutes long. I will have maybe a 20 or 30 second pitch, and I'll say, hey, this video is about topic X. There's a lot more to learn about topic X from different people in the engineering community available in Taro. Go check it out at jointaro.com. And by the way, you can get the cost of Taro reimbursed. So basically in every single video, I deliver free value. And then I basically have a very natural tie-in to say, hey, there's a lot more available for you in this app I'm building.
Yeah. So a lot of YouTubers, they monetize through like AdSense, through sponsors, through affiliate marketing and stuff like that. Even though you have AdSense turned on, you're not really, that's not like really a goal for you to you don't even bother finding sponsors and stuff like that, because that's not scalable in terms of like a venture backed company should be scalable.
Yeah, exactly. Like what we have signed up for, and I'm happy about this decision, is that we are signed up for making a big business with helping a lot of people. And so just inherently, when you take on a sponsor and the sponsor pays you whatever, $1,000, I've gotten a ton of reach outs from sponsors. You're like, the way I think about it is, what is creating compounding value? And when you take on a sponsor for a video, you plug them and you get paid money. There's no compounding value. How do you take that and then make a much bigger opportunity a year from now or even a month from now? Whereas if you can funnel more and more people in Taro and you make Taro the destination for high quality engineering discussion, that is compounding value, because the more users you have, the more valuable the discussion you have, and the more you can provide value to the whole community on the app. And so I've been very deliberate about not wasting time with sponsors. The way I think about the AdSense is that, yeah, it's kind of, I'll turn it on just because it's already there. And I'll funnel all the revenue I get back from YouTube into making better videos.
And like I think you said that you have a few hundred paying subscribers for Taro. Who is your subscriber base? Is it just individual engineers, or are you selling like bulk licenses to larger companies now?
Currently, we're not. So the way I think about this question, which is basically B2C versus B2B, is that right now we're 100% B2C. Like, the decision to make a purchase of Taro Premium is entirely made by the individual engineer. Eventually, we do want to go more on the B2B route. We do want to be able to offer Taro and sell 20 or 30 licenses at a time instead of one at a time. But that'll, I think, come once we're a bit bigger and we have even more credibility among our audience.
And
so
that
right now,
hiring like a sales team.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that right now we're trying to keep the team very lean. And as soon as you go B2B, the sales cycle is much longer. You have to have a sales team and all these things that I think that at this point we don't want to get involved in.
Yeah. And how are you hiring right now?
Right now, it's a team of 3. So it's a tiny team. We're not hiring actively at all. It's me, Alex, and we have one employee. And we're doing everything from the building up of the 3 platforms we have, Android, iOS, and web. We also do customer support. We also do this content creation, which is in itself a full-time job, and also looking and talking to customers about what they want to see going forward.
So one thing I also talk about with creators a lot is like their personal brand and how much it's tied to their business. Obviously, your personal brand was very foundational for not only launching this business, but also your initial user acquisition. How worried are you about it being too closely tied in terms of you being able to step away, or for it to get acquired, or to operate separately from you? Do you feel confident that you're in a position to where you could step away if there was to be an acquisition or something like that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it is something I think about a lot. Right now, the answer is no. I think that my brand is very deeply tied to Taro. And if I stopped making YouTube videos, or if I stepped away, it would put Taro in a difficult position. The way I think about it is, long term, I think the YouTube channel is under my name, and I anticipate that I continue doing that. But I want Taro, the app, the experience of the product, to be independent of any one person. Like, that Taro company and the business and the lessons you learn on Taro should be much, much bigger and much more important than just one person's opinions or ideas, mine or Alex's. And so what we're trying to do with this Q&A forum is, I don't want to be there answering every question. I don't want to be the person dominating the conversation. I want it to be a really good exchange of ideas from every kind of engineer. And so I think that YouTube will continue to go, and obviously I want to keep growing on YouTube, but I want the Taro app experience to be much bigger than any one person.
So when you look over the next 2 to 3 years, what are your kind of immediate goals in terms of raising money, hiring people? Like, what does that immediate horizon look like in terms of how you would like to grow the company?
So one of the things that I'm really happy about with Taro is that we made the decision to start off B2C. And what that means is that we can immediately build a product, right? Because you don't have to have all this feature creep and additional kind of sales team that you mentioned with B2B. And so what that means is we actually have meaningful revenue immediately. Like, within a couple of months, we are almost at profitability now. And so I actually like this idea of the best way to raise money is if you don't need money, right? And so the way Alex and I think about it is over the next year or two, we want to get to profitability, like healthy profitability. And then we can control our destiny of when we want to raise money, if we want to raise money, etc. I do think that so success for the next year is we kind of 5x the number of paying members of Taro, along with starting to build a muscle of what B2B looks like. And that's something that I think is a bit early to really figure out like how that'll come about. But those are the two main priorities for Taro.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Rahul, those are all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
I am most active on YouTube, of course. So if you just look up Rahul Pandey on YouTube, you should find me. I'm also super active on LinkedIn and Twitter. So again, rpandey1234 is my handle on Twitter and LinkedIn. Or if you just look up my name, I should come up as well.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
I appreciate it. It's super fun for me as well. Thanks for having me.